Today's scripture reading, the passage of the Hebrew people wandering the desert. This is one of the first stretches. I love it. I know I love a lot of the passages of the Bible, but this one is a good one because this is one of these gentle reminders, my friends, that the characters in the Bible are not these gigantic pillars of faith who never wandered, who never strayed, who never got upset. And in fact, this is one of these passages that the more things change, the more things stay the absolute same. Here are these people. The Israeli people at this point have survived not only generations of slavery in Egypt, but then the 10 plagues of all of our favorite Charlton Heston movie, were liberated from Egypt, the end of slavery, of their captivity. They pass through the sea, the Sea of Reeds, the Red Sea, however you heard it, on dry land, walls of water. All the special effects budget gone. And you would think at that point, if you were there, you would believe, you would trust, whatever happens, God's got me. I just got out of slavery in Egypt. They sent plagues. I walked through a river, and yet here we are, other side of the river in a desert, and the people, I didn't care as much for this translation. It said complain. The one I kept working on was grumbled. The people grumbled at Moses. They grumbled at Aaron. And they start looking back into their past, 3 months ago. It's not like this is the next generation. This is 3 months. And saying to themselves, oh, Egypt, it wasn't that bad, was it? I mean, yeah, we were enslaved, but at least we had a routine. We knew what to expect. So this, for me, it's just, and then they go, well, Moses, do something. Aaron, you should be doing something. We remember all this stuff of how nice it was in Egypt. Why don't you do something about it? Talk to God. Oh, that kept building on me. This whole, when we think about memory, because that's kind of where we're headed with this. You look to the past, you look to a previous version of yourself. That was one of the conversations in last week's sermon, is you look back to an old version of yourself, however many years ago that was. And how do you handle that emotional reaction? This week is a little bit more on this internal work of memory. Human memory is not a very reliable resource. Human memory is not, usually one eyewitness account isn't enough in a trial. The number of TED Talks about how you really need to work on your memory and your memory is not as good as you think it is are legion. And I buy into it personally. I've got this, I have a memory that is as crystal clear of my childhood. I'm in my house that I grew up in Mora. That's where I started life. My dad is sitting in his favorite chair. He's reading the Sunday paper, and I can hear the crack of the paper because he never just turned a page. It was whoosh, whoosh. And I remember him smoking his pipe, and I can hear the crack of the ice in his drink. And as I turn to him, and I'm like, where are the comics, Dad? And it's Calvin and Hobbes and Peanuts, and he's teaching me how to read as he's puffing away, and it's the smell that usually gets me, because it's not like cigarettes or cigars. There's a distinct smell to the pipe smoke that I'm brought back. And I say this to my parents when they were still with me, and they looked at each other and looked at me and said, well, that didn't happen. What? No. Your dad gave up smoking pipe when your older brother was born. They aren't even out of the box since we moved to Mora. What? Like, this is a good, this is a solid, did I make this up? Probably. Like, to this day, I can picture where everything is. The rotation of the pipes. So when I hear that memory isn't as what you think it is, I'm inclined to believe them. No wonder, to some extent, the Israelite people, the Hebrew people, one of the most common phrases. Pastors are real quick to say that the most common command of God is fear not. But the most common phrase in the Bible is, I am the God who liberated you from Egypt. Why does God keep saying it? Because you're forgetting it. Because you've forgotten and you need reminding. And then memory can get a little messy. Because it's not just maybe, I doubt many of you can familiar yourselves with me where you seem to have fabricated a memory. But I bet at some point you look back at some memory of your life and someone who was with you in that time disagrees about how that event happened. What was the ramifications? What were the big takeaways? And what it even means for you. One person says, that was such a great time in my life. If I could go back and live that again, I absolutely would. The other person says, I haven't healed from that time yet. One person thinks that the other is, you're not taking that event in our lives seriously. Well, you are being way too emotional about it. It can be really big. I mean, I think that this is part of our collective conversation when members of our country are saying back then, in that time in our nation's history, that was where we need to go back to. But if you were to ask any African American, any brown person, any LGBTQ person, probably that time wasn't as great as we remember. Memory isn't simply remembering facts and figures, dates, or the rotation of events. It is where our grief and our aspiration, our hope and our ego and our identity can all be tangled together. If it's a time that gives hope, anticipation, who you want to be, oh, there's a market for that. Last year, I don't rail against Hollywood. This will be the only complaint you'll ever hear from me about, like, oh, Hollywood. Last year, the majority of movies were sequels or remakes. I want original stories. But what they're trying to do, the thing is it's a business. Hollywood's a business. And they'll come right back and say, 60% of the money made in Hollywood was on remakes and sequels. So we're still going to them. Top grossing movies. But then there's a little less newspaper. More of that nostalgia. I've got a friend. They watch, not every week, but we've talked about this, and if they're watching it, they know. They said to me that I had preached a sermon a couple of weeks ago, and this was the comment. Well, this was a little more than a couple of weeks ago. The comment was, Luke, that sermon, that was like the old Luke. That was so good. It was like the old Luke. And, okay, it took me a while to get what he was trying to say to me. What he was trying to say to me. Well, eventually I figured it out after I did the work. What he's trying to say is, there was a time that what you were saying to me on a regular basis really meant something to where I was. And that sermon reminded me of those times when it happened regularly. I was their pastor at the time, so I spoke to them all the time. Well, weekly. And so I got there. But you know what the journey I had to go through was? My first reaction when they say, well, that was like the old Luke. What I heard is, I prefer who you were, not who you are. That any kind of growth that I have made as a communicator, as a spiritual leader, has somehow distracted them, or is somehow no longer beneficial for them. Both are true, right? I had to do a lot of work to hear what he was really saying. And still, even the work that I still hold, that because of the changes and the passing of time, I do preach a lot different than I did 10 years ago. One of my favorite pastors says he throws away his sermon notes every 7 years. All gone into the trash. Because he should be preaching a fresh word. And after 7 years, most of what you have to say is no longer relevant. I mean, to be fair, use a metaphor, you'll remember that. But sometimes when you grow, it means that people you love might not recognize you. They may not remember. They may not look at you and see the person they used to know. Sometimes becoming your whole and true self, becoming who God made you to be, is lonelier than you ever expected. The Israelite people were hungry, and not just for food. What they wanted was certainty, comfort, predictability. I've been there. We as a people have been there. You want the comfortable of the predictable. And when those things go missing, there's a tendency to tell inaccurate stories about the past. Well, we had bread in Egypt, but what was the cost of that bread? Whatever that good part of that memory, what would it cost you to go back? The struggle becomes, you have left Egypt. You have recognized that you are not who you once were, but you're not yet where you need to be. You're part of the growing process. Or in the biblical parlance, you're in the wilderness. The wilderness is brutal, not because you're lost, you're just in between two locations. And in this space, that bread in your hand can feel fragile. Old comforts look holy. Old prisons can feel safe. And when hunger hits, whether it's for certainty or for the affirmation from someone just to say you're doing okay, you can start wondering if the freedom you have started to experience is really worth it. But there are two graces in this story. First off, what was God's response to the grumbling? What's God's reaction? These people, it's not, well, done. Let them have it. They're so fed up with all the wonders and miracles. God provides. God doesn't shame the wilderness version of you. God does not shame the part of you that is growing, that has not figured it out yet, that still has a lot of questions about the now, and you're just not certain, and you're worried and questioning. God meets you right there and says, I have bread. God listens to the grumbling. God hears the fear beneath the nostalgia. And instead of saying, you ought to be better, God says, here's your bread. Not when you're healed, not when you're strong, not when you're holy and ready, but right now, in the midst. And that bread, this story, this miracle of bread from heaven, what gets called manna, is incredible. This idea that God provides just enough for the day. It reminds me of the Mohandas Gandhi quote, the world has enough for everyone's need, but not everyone's greed. We have enough for everyone's need, but not everyone's greed. Because the bread that's provided is only enough for today. Now, before I spiritualize this a little, before I sentimental or teach this in metaphor, I do want to say that there are enough hungry people in the world that the only good news that could possibly be presented to them is actual bread. There are enough hungry people that the good news of this story, the actual hearing of this story, if you want to see it in their lives, is if real food came to them. But for us who are generally fed, who are in the midst of a wilderness, not of necessarily food scarcity, but a scarcity of hope for tomorrow, can we see the manna for today? The small bits that we go out to collect. When you have felt unseen, unsure, and unloved, and someone in your life, whether by note, smile, or words, reminds you that you are a gift in this world. That's manna from heaven. When the world moves too fast, when the noise is so loud, when doom feels imminent, but suddenly there's a song or a silence, there's a stillness, and you feel just a little bit more yourself again. That's manna from heaven. When you say a thing, the truth that has to be, and your voice shakes a little bit, claiming your power, your presence, your voice, and you feel the weight of your words, that's manna from heaven. And finally, just a reminder, Jesus said, I am the bread of heaven come down. His teaching, his example, his life can nourish you no matter the dry spots, no matter the barren wastelands, the deserts where you are looking for just an inch of growth or hope. And Christ's faithfulness never dries out, no matter our circumstance, no matter our grumblings. And in him we put our trust. Amen.